Okay, section 4. Settlements. We're back to the Native Americans and that conflict that we saw building previously in section 2. Settlement and conflict on the plains. The nice draw in this. We got a variety of different things. We got the settlement of the white towns trying to build up. We get in the distance here wagon trains as further people go to settle. We got the great expanse of this whole area here, showing the promise that was potentially available. We get the trains which bring these new settlers into these areas, and choking on the smoke of the trains, we get the Native Americans suffering as the West is colonized. So just to be clear, it's a painting by F. Palmer on the right there, and you saw on the previous slide. Railroad is going to be absolutely huge in changing the plain. Now, of course, the American government had realised that there are settlements on the east, there are settlements on the west, but there's very little to connect them. And we saw the really difficult journey that Western settlers had to make it going across the country. So the Pacific Railroad Act in 1862 gives government land and money to companies willing to build this transcontinental railroad. $50 million have been made available in 1964. 6,400 acres are granted for every mile of track built, because we're talking about absolutely huge amounts of land here. And in 1869, the first transcontinental railway was built by two companies who met in the middle, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific companies. Thousands of workers are needed. 12,000 Chinese migrants were employed by the Central Pacific Company to tunnel through the mountain range of the Sierra Nevada and the Rocky Mountains. Awful conditions in the heat and the freezing snow of winter. Terrible sanitation. But the drive towards the money that was at the end of this meant that the companies made the money and the workers were exploited and suffered. Well, the railroads divide the Indian lands from north and south, so we know that's going to be a problem, and it's where the buffalo had previously roamed. There's a change here, though, also because after the Civil War, great herds of cattle have been found. 1866, Charles Goodnight, Oliver Loving drive 2,000 cattle to plains markets and make $24,000 from that, and now that becomes a common thing to do. It's realised there's an awful lot of money available in this drive to get this cattle. We get in 1867 we get the first cow town of Abilene in Kansas, and it's advertised as a place to bring cattle to the railways for sale in the north and east. And there was disorder in these towns initially, as often you see in westerns. But very soon sheriffs are introduced, and it doesn't last long. You can imagine the cowboys then going in from a long drive and want to have a bit of fun and partying, and the conflict that would come from that. Cowboys, despite their image, were often very small because they needed to stay on a horse. Mostly poor young men. About a third were Mexicans or Indians or ex-slaves hoping for money. We get a change because that only lasts about 20 years. Those drives. John Iliffe changed this. He says, let's keep the animals on the plains to be closer to the cattle towns, and open cattle ranching had spread throughout the Central Plains. Now this causes problems for anyone trying to live in the plains because there's a scarcity of water and grass for the buffalo herds, and the Indians have a risk of starvation. Okay, that's cattle ranchers. Homesteaders are another group of people who were willing to take on these awful conditions. 1860s and 70s, 500,000 homesteaders moved just to one of the states. That's just to Kansas. Why are they doing it? Well, California and Oregon, though attractive, are quite relatively expensive places to go to. There's cheap prices compared to those new states. The government also encouraged people to do it with the Homestead Act of 1862. If you farmed your 160 acres for 5 years and paid a small fee, then you would get that land. And we have an issue here where women were also able to exploit this. Up to 50% of all homesteaders were owned by women. And railroad companies who'd set up the railroad, well, they had an incentive to get people to go to these areas and to buy into this idea. So they had a huge advertising campaign encouraging people to come over and to use the railroads to go and build their homesteads. Awful problems for these homesteaders, because the wood's in short supply. They make their houses called soddies out of earth and grass roots. But this obviously is a lack of cleanliness. There's diseases such as cholera become common. There's a lack of water. They have this thing called dry farming, where basically whenever it rains, you plough it to trap in the water, and they use Turkey red wheat from Russia, which could withstand the frost and therefore was a more hardy crop to grow. Even if they were successful in establishing the homestead, they're often very, very isolated, miles away from their nearest neighbours. The tough roots of the grass broke the ploughs. The soddies often leaked. There was no wood. They had to burn dried buffalo or cow droppings to keep themselves warm. And then, ironically, in the summer, in the hot summer months, fire was a problem, and we had locust swarms. 1874 to 1877. They had to try to stop the roaming cattle, from trampling the crops. Although that was improved with the invention of barbed wire in 1874, which pretty much sets out these areas into little kingdoms of their own, separating each farmland but causing more problems for the Native Americans. Not surprisingly, all these people coming into the plains causes a major issue. Rivalry between different tribes and the settlers. The issue is that many of the tribes are being sent to land reservations where they had to rely on the government to feed themselves, or had to turn to farming, and that's a major change for the Native Americans, and many just refuse to do it. And conflict has increased by the fact we've got civil war, meant that over a third of each household owns at least one gun. The series of different disputes now. In each one, there's a dispute over land. There's often something to do with the reservation. There's individuals who cause problems, and there's the seeking of violence and revenge. So Little Crow's War of 1861 to 62. The Sante Sioux had all given up 28 million acres of land for small reservations in South Minnesota and faced starvation. But the agent in charge of their reservation refused them food. So the Sioux, desperately needing that food, attacked farms and towns, and 500 settlers were slaughtered by Little Crow's followers. Minnesota soldiers fought back. Little Crow was killed, and when they did so, they took their heads and their scalps were publicly displayed. 38 Sante Sioux were hanged, hundreds were imprisoned, and others were taken to the reservations in Dakota Territory. Some settlers thought that the Sioux had got off lightly. Now, I mentioned earlier the gold at Pikes Peak, with the Cheyenne and the other Arapaho being sent onto a small reservation. One of those reservations near Sand Creek led to great suffering, and that led to many of those Native Americans raiding settlers. There is a series of disputes between the local army and the settlers, and one particular unit, the 3rd Colorado Volunteers, led by Reverend John Chivington, were mocked because they'd not seen action, they'd not done anything. They were called the Bloodless Third. So when a settler is killed, these troops, looking to prove themselves, march onto the Sand Creek reservation. They kill 105 Cheyenne women and children, 28 men. They put on display their scalps and their genitalia as trophies. A government investigation sees Chivington and his men arrested, and Chivington's forced to resign from the army. But it really is a story of, well, it's a massacre, as the title suggests. It's a massacre. Further issues with gold. The Bosman Trail ran through the Lakota Sioux's hunting ground. Now that was used by gold prospectors, and it was banned as part of the Fort Laramie Treaty. However, gold moves mountains, and gold prospectors kept going through it. So in 1866, Red Cloud and other Lakota leaders, such as Crazy Horse, attacked the US forts. They lured out 80 men and killed them and mutilated those men. And they actually have a series of victories, 1867 to 1868. And the government guarantees that US troops and settlers will not enter a vast area around the Black Hills of Dakota. So it looks like there's been a victory. It doesn't last long. There's rumours of new gold in the Black Hills of Dakota. Tens of thousands of miners enter the Sioux lands causing huge problems. The government do offer them $6 million for the Black Hills, and one of the leaders, Red Cloud, agreed to it. However, other leaders don't agree to it, and that causes huge problems. President Grant's furious because he believes he's got a deal. Sioux and the other allies are forced into a reservation, and then after a vision comes to them, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse set up their own camp on the banks of the Little Big Horn River. So this is the famous incident, one of the most famous incidents of this whole sad campaign. General Custer, in 1876, surrounds the 6,000 Indians, of which 1,800 are warriors, with 210 cavalrymen, but he's outnumbered 4-1, and is defeated. It's a great victory for the Native Americans, but it doesn't last because the US Army prevents the warriors from getting their daily supply of food, and they kept them on the run. The US hunt down all the Sioux bands. Crazy Horse is arrested and killed in 1877. Sitting Bull flee to Canada with a small band of warriors, but the remaining Sioux in America have to surrender. The US take the Black Hills of Dakota and a further 40 million acres of Indian land. They won a battle, but they were clearly losing the war.